Yeah, so when I'm in a shooting slump, I usually start by trying to remember that I'm a good shooter to begin with and that I need to keep shooting, because the only way really out of the slump in live play is to continue to shoot and start to make shots. And then around that, there's a few things I do, or a checklist of things I start to look at to see whether or not I'm doing everything I can to prepare myself to shoot. Basic things like, one, warming up appropriately before I start to play so that I can build some confidence in my shooting. In playing, shots come and it's higher cognitive load. I have the feel of makes already kind of coming out of me. Two would be basic stuff around my basketball practice, like my food and whether or not I'm timing when I eat to when I play. My rest and recovery stuff, and my body, like, is my body feeling really tired or fatigued? Am I playing too much, or am I working out too often or getting too tired before I play? That can affect my shooting. And I think one of the biggest things that I found is my sleep, especially if you're going to be shooting a lot of deep shots or a lot of highly contested shots. All of that is going to fall apart if you're not sleeping appropriately and getting good sleep at night. It's just such a complex skill, both hands being involved, fine motor skills being involved, the rest of your body being involved. If you're not sleeping well, you're less likely to perform that skill at a high level. Then sometimes if things are going really poorly for a while, I'll start watching some film of myself playing to see if I'm doing anything weird when I shoot. Sometimes I watch film of myself shooting. Oftentimes there's not enough pressure or cognitive load going on in just workout shots to really be slumping in a workout. But sometimes you do funny things when you're playing that you don't notice. You'll be taking extra long to shoot it. You'll be slow coming up with the ball so you don't have as much power on the way out, or you'll be rushing your shots, shooting shots faster than you need to based on the amount of space you have when you're playing. So kind of all of those things, one being remembering that I'm a good shooter and that I need to keep shooting and that I'll shoot my way through it in live play. Lots of different aspects that make things make for pressure. One is just your internal expectations of yourself, and those show up when you're shooting all by yourself. How often should I be missing any specific shot before I start making it, or the social aspect, which I think is probably the most devious and the most pressureful aspect of anything that you do in front of an audience, in front of other people, with someone else around. The more people that are watching, the more people that could be paying attention, and the more those people mean to you, the more pressure there's going to be on a task. And then you also, like, your teammates and the other team and your coaches, those are all included in the social aspect of pressure. And then you have other, I guess, more tangible pressures like time, how long you have to get a shot off. All of those are going to increase your cognitive load. You're not going to fix the slump without shooting. At a certain point, you're going to have to make some shots, which is going to involve shooting, which is also going to involve missing. I think younger players are going to have more variance in their fundamentals. So they're going to have to, go back to their form shooting sequences, their base drills, to continue to polish those things, because, you're a kid and you end up not really working on your game in a skills development capacity for a few weeks because you have practices and trainings and you go on a few trips because you got AAU tournaments or something, and then all of a sudden you're in a little bit of a slump, but it's because you haven't really locked in your fundamentals consistently in a way that's going to continue to be effective. So you got to go back to those things. A lot of times for younger players, that would be probably the main difference between being an older player, having been consistent with those things and having developed your routines and owned your routines, and being a younger player and, not being as bought in, or just, having the cycle of basketball take you away from those development things. Travel, the flights, the lack of consistent sleeping in the same time zone sometimes, those things would all be very difficult to be consistent through. They have any number of measures because those guys are locking in their fundamentals super consistently. For the most part, they have people that are working with them all the time on those things. So the first thing that comes to mind would just be things outside of their control that mess with their sleep and their scheduling. You have a lot of demands on your attention and your time as a pro athlete in general, especially as a pro basketball player with being such a high status job. So you can probably get mentally knocked off a little bit with different pressures from family, from friends, from your next contract coming up, expectations from the team, role and hierarchy, complications on the team. Any of that from a season can, knock you off your game a little bit and can potentially cause a slump. I mean, like an NBA player playing in a pickup game is almost never going to have a poor day relative to other people, maybe to their extremely high expectations. They're going to have their days where it's tough. Even the best shooters are going to go through slumps. There's a lot of pressure at that level. The difference between someone who shoots, 33% from three, who would be thought of as an inconsistent shooter, and 37% from three, who would be thought of as a consistent shooter, is literally 4 shots in 100. And if you're watching any individual game, it all looks the same, because most guys, they're rotation players, are shooting like 3 to 7 threes a game. You can't even tell the difference between a consistent and inconsistent shooter game over game. And the same thing goes in workouts. Like good players, guys that shoot 33, 34% for three in the NBA, they don't miss very much in workouts. They don't miss very much when there's not that much pressure. And so if you're watching them practice, you'd be astounded that they're thought of as like, an okay or / inconsistent shooter. And guys that shoot 37, 38%, they also barely miss in workouts. So the difference in consistency is very, very small. I would say the biggest difference between those people is probably just one general shooting ability. Maybe it's something that one person has found a different way of chunking the skill, and that's hard to tell, right? Because that's something that goes on in their head that they might not even be explained. It might be that they have better preparation and they're, more apt to get better sleep, time their nutrition with their performance better. They may have a better performance staff on their team, and so they're more prepared to play game over game, and that comes out in the numbers. It could be that they take slightly better shots in terms of slightly less contested shots, like a small percentage of their shots are less contested, so their volume's a little bit down compared to what it could be. There's just like so many factors that go into those small percentages that it's hard to tell exactly why somebody at that level isn't a little bit more consistent. Talk about volume of shots and how you need certain sample size to really be slumping or be hot. Going 4 for 6 means you were hot that game, but 4 for 6 is not a legitimate sample size. That's, it feels legitimate because it's the actual full game, but it's just not a very big sample. Once you get into the hundreds of shots, you're getting a pretty solid sample size. But if you're thinking about shooting in games, if you're a high volume shooter, we're talking about at least 6 games just to get to 100 shots. So any run within one of those games of 1 for 6, it feels much worse than it is. So if you go 1 for 6, and then you go 3 for 4, you're back at nearly a good shooting percentage again. I think you're nearly 45% already. And 1 for 6 feels terrible, and 3 for 4 feels pretty good. And those are just kind of the swings of being someone who's going to be in the game shooting. And so I think for people who are in slumps, what can happen is, you go 1 for 6. Sometimes people go 1 for 3 or 1 for 4, and they start to average their day or their week or a larger sample into how they feel in that moment, and that can be counterproductive. At the same time, it can be counterproductive if you're doing that with your 2 for 2 performance. Like, I'm hot today because I'm 2 for 2, but your role in the team says you're going to shoot 9 times, so you might not be hot because you got to shoot 7 more times. So I think staying even keeled, being prepared to shoot the shots that you're supposed to shoot in the game because the game is coming to you in a certain way and you have a certain role for your team. Those are probably the most important things when you think about like being in a slump or being hot, because those are the things that are going to throw you off course. There's times where you're hot and then you start to shoot shots outside of the shots that you typically make or typically shoot, and now you've taken your team out of what they're doing. You've put yourself in a position where you're less likely to make the next shot, and you've kind of thrown off your flow and how things were going. At the same time, you're 1 for 6, and now you pass on a shot that you're supposed to shoot because you've averaged that thing in your head out to, I'm not shooting well that day. now you've let your team down because you didn't shoot the shot you're supposed to shoot, and you took yourself out of a position of, getting back on track and making a shot that is typically a good shot for you. And so I think, slumps imply streaks. When we're talking about slumps or streaks, those are just kind of the things that happen when you're shooting. You should do your best to continue to shoot the shots that are good for you. Once in a while, when you really get it going, maybe you heat check, and then once in a while, if you're really struggling and it's an important point in the game, you pass on a marginal look for something, with a teammate that's a little bit better. But for the most part, outside of those, pretty heavily weighted outliers of being extremely hot or being like as down in the dumps as you can be, you're just playing your game, shooting the shots that the game presents to you that are within your abilities, and continuing to take the makes and misses as they come.